Okay, good to see you all again on Thursday. Another week. It's always weird, you know. I start each semester all empty boxes and then they just all fill up. You know, just weird. Also kind of sad because we're getting to the end. Maybe you'll take world religions with me. Anyone taking world religions yet? No? There you go. World religions. I think I'm also doing Christian faith again, so you wouldn't want to do that unless, of course, well, we'll see how the semester goes. Hopefully, none of you will have to take it again, but if you do, I'll be there. Okay, we can do this a second time. Listen to my shtick again. But I'm doing world religions, religious studies minor, philosophy minor, plug, or major for philosophy. All right, the church. We are the temple. We are the temple of the Lord. Yes. We are the stones in the temple. We are the bricks of the building. All right. We are the mortar of the magisterium. Does that work? Is that? Well, no, because we're not bishops. Not all of us are bishops. Not all of us are called to the magisterium, I guess. All right, where am I here? Direct early church structures. Yes, deacon, orthodoxy, heresy. The point. Okay, yeah, I'll get to that in a second. All right, so I'm going to hopefully quickly try to go finish on the church and then move on to God. Yeah. Try and do God in like 3 or 4 classes. Yeah, right. Okay. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. This is the post, right? Because I did want to get to this quotation from I talked about how both the threefold structure is mentioned in First Timothy, overseers, elders, and servants. I was talking about both male and female for deacons, not for the others, apparently. Okay. And here we just have maybe I'll just mention this because this will come back in with sacraments, that Paul specifically mentions how Timothy had the laying on of hands. I told you how for some reason touching is a big thing, right? So it's a good symbol. And I see that, when you care about someone, you touch them. You want to hug them or you just want to feel them, right? You don't want to look at them or say, okay, you stay over there. And so the touching with hands, you had chiron, like chiropractor means someone who works with his or her hands. Chiro means hand. So chiron with hands. Okay, you had the hands placed on you for the presbyterate. He says presbyteriu, which is not episcop. You would think episcopu, or episcopariu, or excuse me, what would be the? I have to look that up and read. But anyways, so you see again the count. You've been received your power, Timothy, from the laying on of hands by the group of elders. Notice not overseers. That's interesting. So again, we see this kind of murkiness, the presbyter bishop kind of murkiness, where the language is kind of going both ways. There wasn't such a clear-cut distinction in language, at least, between what an overseer was and what an elder was. They're kind of doing the same things. Okay. All right, moving on from that. And here's from a book. Do I want to say that or can I move on? Because I've already done this. Lumen Gentium, I'm not going to get into that. Yeah. This is I know this is repetitive, and it will be repetitive when we get to holy orders, the sacrament of holy orders. But just to give you definitions of the threefold structure, this is a little more complete, or it is complete. I already mentioned the overseer bishop, so you have that definition. I'll get to the Pope in a minute. I'll mention the Pope briefly. I don't think I'll give you the definition on the quiz, but I will have some information on the Pope. Priest or elder, okay, is someone who's been ordained to share in the ministry service of the bishop, specifically the priestly service of offering the Eucharist, especially the Eucharist. And then finally, one who's been ordained as an assistant, helper, servant to the bishop and his priests. Okay. The deacon's job now, if you go to a Catholic church and you see a guy there, dressed kind of in a different type of garment than the priest. The priest has like a robe that covers everything, the chasuble, but the deacon has more of a looks like a big shirt that's worn over his what's called an awl, the white garment that he wears. And deacons, their ministry has kind of just been reduced to the liturgy. They do stuff in the liturgy, say some things in the liturgy, some of the prayers, maybe preach the gospel or proclaim the gospel for that day. They might, do some of the baptisms for the priest in the parish if the priest doesn't have time or something. You might have, or witness marriages or something. But yeah, they used to have a lot more functions in the early church. The deacon, being a deacon, actually meant something. You had some kind of power and authority in the church, which you do, but not as much as it's mainly restricted to worship. So whatever. Just giving you that little historical lesson. So the threefold ministry. So these are your definitions. The overseer, the head dude. I guess you could say the priest is kind of like the vice president, has some of the authority, can do some of the things of the overseer, but not everything. And then the deacon is maybe, I guess you could say, like, I don't know, personal assistant, a PA. What we used to call a secretary when I was growing up, but now you can't say that, so you say personal assistant, who assists the bishop in his job. So that's kind of the structure. All right. I do want to get to this. All right, I'll pass by the Didache. This is a more important quote. This is a quote from a gentleman, St. Ignatius of Antioch. St. Ignatius of Antioch. Where is Antioch, Ms. Franco Zamora? Where do you think it is? Oops, hold on a second here. What's it doing to me? Where do you think it is, Ms. Franco Zamora? Take a guess. Where on the planet? Take a guess. The city of Antioch. What do you think? Is it in the United States?
Wait.
Huh? Antioch. It's not. You don't think so? No. Well, think about it. I mean, if I'm referring to something from early Christianity, probably not. Probably is not from, unless of course you're a Latter-day Saint. And well, no, even in the Book of Mormon, Jesus hadn't arrived until like the 400s AD in North America. So no. All right. Where do you think? So I'll give you a hint. It's in the Mediterranean world, the Eastern Mediterranean. Anyone want to take a guess? Is Franco Zamora? A guess? Why can't we just call it Turkey? Why do we have to call it Turkey now? Did everyone notice that change? It's always been Turkey when I was growing. There's nothing. What's wrong? They don't want to be called Turkey or something? Do they have something against turkeys?
How they spell it?
Yeah, in Turkish.
Well, that's how they.
Yeah, in Turkish. Yeah, no. Okay. But I mean, why don't we call Italy Italia? Well, well we call that, we say Italia? Exact. No, you're right. They do call it Italian. Because they're Italians. Yes, Miss Miller? Have you smiled yet today, Ms. Hoy? Sorry, Ms. Miller. Go ahead. What do you think? Yeah. Okay, good. You got him one. The Turkey area. Ancient Antioch, the Turkey area. I think, huh? Yeah, have you smiled today? Have all of you smiled today? Actually, let me check this out because I want to make sure that I'm right that it's Turkey and not Syria. It's in this region, okay? I think it is in the modern border of Turkey. Well, let me just check here. Maybe the city is still there. Let's see. Oh, there it is. Antakya. Okay. But there are two Antiochs, so you can get kind of confused, or I can get kind of confused. There's what's called Syrian Antioch and Antioch. And I think we're talking here about the Antioch that's in Turkey. I don't think it's the Syrian Antioch, but I could be, maybe I should look that up. Let's look that up. Let's see. Major city in modern Turkey. Ancient Antioch of the Orontes. Yes, yes, yes. That sounds like what I'm looking for. Let's find a map. I don't know why this is so large. Should be reset. There we go. Yeah, there we go. Not in existence. The three dots here indicate it's an archaeological site. Okay, so ancient Antioch. Anyways, where am I? Oh no, I want the map again. Sorry. Okay, so our friend, this man Ignatius, was from Antioch over here. Well, he was a Syrian, so I'm assuming I'm assuming it was from Antioch in Syria. But that's the, anyways, from that region. You know, very southern Turkey, maybe from western Syria. Okay, and he lived. We think he was born around 50 A.D. and he died in 117, around 117. And he was a Christian at a time when being a Christian, as those of you who have read Mark's Gospel know, was for some Christians a time of suffering and persecution because they were outsiders, they were weird, they were unusual. No one knew what to make of them. They knew they wouldn't follow the local gods or the gods of the empire. So it was kind of like being unpatriotic in a way, you know, which could mean death and persecution. So he was identified as a Christian, or at least, you know, a member of this group that would not, you know, do the things that a Roman citizen was supposed to do to be a citizen. One of them was participating in the worship of the gods of Rome. And so he was arrested and he was sentenced to death. And so they put him on a boat and were shipping him all the way to Rome for execution. Rome to execution, feed him to the lions, you know, put him in, you know, whatever. But anyways, I guess they could have just killed him then and there, but for some reason they decided, no, we'll ship him off to Rome so he can be executed. So he knows he's going to die. I mean, that's why he's on, you know, it's not like he's going to Rome and there might be an appeal process. No. No, he knows he's going to die. As soon as the ship gets there, you know, they're going to put him in another prison waiting for his death. So along the way, he writes letters to various Christian communities, a lot of them in Turkey. He writes to Rome as well, but a lot of them in Turkey, okay, as he's going, and just little letters, they're short letters, encouraging them in their faith, stay strong in the faith, don't worry about me, I know I'm going to die, don't try to save me, you know, just he kind of made peace with the fact that he was going to die. And he was okay with that. And so he's a saint. So he does die. Now, he wrote these letters, okay, during his lifetime. He died in 117 AD. You know, think about like when the Gospel of John, we think, was written, or the book of Revelation, the Apocalypse of John, 90s and 100s. Interesting. Throughout much of his lifetime, apparently, those potato chips, are they sour cream or just regular? Oh, I can't see. I don't have my eyeglasses. Huh? They're regular? Aren't those technically potato crisps, though? I'm just messing with you, Miss Lacey. Anyways, what was I saying? Oh, yeah, so throughout much of his life, the New Testament was being written, or I guess all of the New Testament. No, Paul wrote his First Thessalonians around the time Ignatius was born. So yeah, he was there at the dawning of the New Testament scriptures, grew up with them, and wrote during them. So why isn't his stuff in the New Testament if it's during the time that the New Testament was written? He talks about Jesus all over the place. He's an Orthodox Christian, so, you know, he taught the true faith. So, you know, he's not an apostle, but I forget if Ignatius knew any of the apostles, or did he know Polycarp, who knew St. John? Well, anyways, He's not an apostle, so apostolic authority doesn't necessarily entail. But certainly, the rule of faith, he does keep the rule of faith. That criterion applies. But, the churches didn't, and he wrote to churches. He wrote letters to churches, but they didn't use them in their liturgy. They didn't apparently accept them as scriptural. They took them for what they were, letters from just a holy man, a martyr for the faith. Okay? So he writes to this group of Christians in this town or the city of Smyrna, which I believe is, oh, no, there it is, right there, Izmir, modern Izmir, Smyrna, right here on the coast of Western Turkey. And in that letter to the Smyrnians, he says this. Whoops. Yeah, there we go. Who would like to read this extract from St. Ignatius of Antioch's letter to the Smyrnians, the church in Smyrna, ancient Turkey? Like to do that? Thank you, Miss Peralti. Huh?
The words on the screen?
What? Yes.
See that you all follow the bishop, enact Christ as God the Father, and follow the priest, and reverence the deacons as being the integral. Let no man do anything that the church without truth. Let that be deemed proper.
Good. Eucharist.
Which is done either by the bishop or by one who has entrusted. Wherever the bishop shall appear, there let to also be, even as wherever Jesus Christ is, there is a Catholic. It is not lawful without the bishop either to baptize or to separate you by the bishop. But whatsoever shall be of that is also pleasing to God, so that everything that is done may be secured in God. It is well to reverence both God and the bishop. He who honors the bishop has been honored by God.
Excellent. Okay, so letter to the Smyrnians. And this is kind of a recurring theme throughout a number of Ignatius' letters. Follow the bishop. Follow the bishop, the overseer. He's big on the bishop. I'm following the bishop. But notice that this is evidence outside of the New Testament, again, supporting or showing that this threefold structure was already understood to exist amongst Christians. He mentions the overseer, the bishop, he mentions elders, the priests, and he mentions the deacons, the servants. Okay? Whether this structure had developed everywhere in the same way yet, still early days, not sure. For example, in Rome, say in Rome, since we get to the Pope, to be relevant, they had multiple overseers, they had multiple bishops over the city of Rome, I guess because the community was so large, I'm assuming. So in a way, in modern terms, you could say they had several popes in Rome at that time. But there was one of those several bishops who would be the first, kind of like the executive of the committee, you might say, the head of the committee. And typically, historically, that person would be regarded as the proper pope. But it wasn't completely the same structure as Ignatius knew from Syria, which was usually you had one bishop for one diocese, for one community. That was it. You don't have two or three or four like a committee. You have one. And then the priests kind of act like the committee. They're kind of like the council of advisors and assistants for the overseer. Okay? So notice what the connections he makes. You start seeing a very kind of early theology of holy orders, the sacrament of holy orders, of the structure of the community. The bishop takes the place of Jesus for the Christian. So as you would listen to Jesus and do what he tells you, listen to the bishop, the overseer, and do as he tells you. The priests are kind of like the apostles that Jesus chose. All right? And then the deacons, well, where do they fit? I don't know. Probably because the deacons were a later invention. We know apparently that, Jesus didn't establish any deacons. I mean, Jesus was a servant figure, right? I am amongst you as the one who serves, right? He calls himself a servant. But he didn't seem to establish any institution in the church specifically deacons. That seems to have come later. The apostles did that. They established the diaconate from what they understood that the church needed. So, development, interesting. So he says it's the institution of God, but he doesn't have question marks. I'm not sure what he means by that. It's an institution of God. It's God motivated, inspired the church to create the office. Nevertheless, you need the bishop. You need the bishop to celebrate the Lord's Supper. You cannot do it without the permission of the bishop. All right, and that entails even today, as I told you in the last class. A bishop can take away the mandate. Well, a priest, I shouldn't say a mandate, but the permission to celebrate the Eucharist. When a man is ordained to the Holy Priesthood, he receives what is called a celebrant. Celebrant, which is Latin for he may celebrate. He can celebrate, which means he has permission to celebrate the sacraments, especially the Mass or the Lord's Supper. Okay? And, how do they do it? Usually it's a piece of paper or something. Maybe it's a card. You can find it online. I found one online once and put my picture on it. And nah. It's all right. It was for Vatican City, from the Pope, signed by the Pope, Bishop of Rome. Put my picture on it, change the name to me. Can do a lot of things with Microsoft name. But anyways, you can find them online if you're curious to see what they look like. They're no big secret. But you do have, because you have to present it. If you're a priest and you travel around like another place or something, another country, and you want to celebrate Mass at a church, the pastor might just be like, all right, I take your word for it. But he might say, no, I want to see your celebrant. I want to see that you were properly ordained a Catholic priest, that you have the mandate, the permission to celebrate the Eucharist. Yeah. Can't do it without the bishop. What other things can't you do? Well, you can't baptize. You need the bishop's permission to baptize. Or at least it's not lawful. It's not lawful. Well, okay. But anyone can really baptize. That's the one sacrament that just about anyone can do. Even a non-Christian can baptize another person, as long as the person intends to do what the sacrament means. So the old hypothetical of, let's say, Mr. Osborne on a desert island, just you and somebody else. Somehow you have a revelation and you want to become a Christian. You're not, but you want to. And your friend is an atheist. Okay, well, what are you going to do? You need someone to pour water on your head 3 times in the name of the Trinity. They ask your friend, will you do this? Well, I don't believe in God. Well, you don't have to believe in God. You intend to do what this rite ritual means. Okay, yes, I do. All right. That's a valid baptism in the eyes of the Catholic Church. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it's enough. Now, if you only have salt water, I wonder if salt water is still doing. It doesn't have to be fresh water. It usually has to be fresh water. That's another question. But anyways, nevertheless, Ignatius is big on the bishop, so don't do these things without the bishop's permission. Don't celebrate a love feast. A love feast is not the same thing as the Eucharist. It was called an agape in the ancient church. Basically, it was like, if you have a potluck supper, at your parish, you go to Mass, and then afterwards they have coffee and donuts and cookies and stuff. People, they say hang out to a community, You have parish dinners, kind of like the same thing. But in the early church, they kind of like had it together with the Mass. So they were having a meal, a real meal, with the meal of the Lord's body and blood. And that fell out of use pretty quickly in the early church, just because it was confusing to people. People were confusing the sacrament of the Eucharist and connecting it with this agape feast, this love feast. And the two were not the same. One was just simply like having dinner with friends, and the other one was, eating the body and blood of the Lord. They were different, but also, just it caused trouble. People would show up drunk, or they would bring their own food and wouldn't share it around with anybody else. You know, they had their own little cliques. You know, in the community, people would hang out with each other. You have the cool Christians, and then, you know, the not so cool, the nerdy Christians. So that kind of fell out of disuse, but you shouldn't do it without the permission of the bishop. And whatever he does approve beyond that is pleasing to God. Okay. Some of you might have noticed that here is the statement of Catholic Church. Ooh, isn't that interesting? Well, the Catholic Church really doesn't have any official name. I mean, there's no trademark name for the Catholic Church. It's so old, there was no name for it. It's just a description, okay? When you say the Catholic Church, people take it as a name, but it's kind of like Jesus Christ. Christ is a description of Jesus. Jesus the Anointed. And Catholic Church is also a description of this ancient community based around the Bishop of Rome and those in communion with him who share the same faith, which is throughout the world. Hence, it is katholikos, it is universal. The Greek word katholikos simply means universal in Greek. Katholikos. Kata, according to, holos, the whole, or as we would translate it, I think, universal. So really it's, you know, the universal church, the church everywhere. And Ignatius probably doesn't mean it here, even though I've capitalized it. Probably at this such an early stage, he's probably not using it as an actual name for the Church of Rome and those who are in communion with the Church of Rome. For him, it's the whole church, which was all united. There were apparently no major divisions at the time, so it was throughout the whole world. It was throughout the whole Roman Empire. So it was universus, it was universal, or as he was writing in Greek, katholikos. But this is still the first ever use of the phrase. This is where the phrase comes from. That's how Christians started describing what they were belonging to, the church of everywhere, the universal church, the Catholic Church. And later on, be more specific, not just once you have people who disagree with what the Catholic Church teaches and form their own little communities. You have the Catholic and Orthodox Church, the true, not just the universal church, but the true teaching church, the church that teaches the truth, as opposed to the heretics, the sectarians who teach their own doctrines, you know? So anyways, it doesn't take on this technical meaning of the Catholic Church as a title for the church, probably around the 200s. So not that far after Ignatius died or lived. But nevertheless, he probably doesn't mean it in that technical sense just yet. Just yet. All right, where does the Pope fit into all of this? I'll be brief on this, on the Pope, but I think it's in the reading as well in the Catechism. Hopefully you've done that, so, you know, some of the questions on the quiz will be based on the reading, which addresses the papacy. The Pope is just a bishop, and Pope is just a title. Papa in Greek means father, and in the early church, all bishops were called Papa. They were all called father. Okay? So there's nothing unique about the Pope's title of Pope, or calling him the Pope. You know, his title is Bishop of Rome. That's really what he is. He's the overseer of the Christian church in Rome, of the Christians who live in the city of Rome. Okay? He's not the Bishop of Philadelphia, the Archbishop of Philadelphia. I forget his name. Gomez or what is it? I keep forgetting. Well, someone look that up for me for an extra credit point. Try to beat Mr. Hinkle to it. Let's see what happens. Yes. Okay, yes. Nelson J. Perez. Yes, I knew it was, I thought it was Hispanic. There you go. Before that, it was Charles Chaput, the bishop of my diocese of the Archieparchy of Philadelphia, Ukrainian Catholic Church, is Boris. It's his last name. Boris, Ukrainian, of course, but Boris Studniak or Studniak? Anyways, I forget. I just know him as Archbishop Boris, Metropolitan Boris. So that's the head of your community here if you're living in Philadelphia and you're a Catholic. Your bishop is not the Pope of Rome or the Bishop of Rome. It's the bishop of the archdiocese, who is Bishop Nelson, okay, who is in communion with the Bishop of Rome and is in communion with all the other thousands of bishops throughout the world who are in communion with Leo, who is now the Pope of Rome, Leo the 14th. Okay, if they were not in, if a bishop said, "Well, I'm no longer in communion with Leo the 14th in Rome," well, and Bishop Nelson would say, "I'm not in communion with you anymore." You know, or if my bishop, Bishop Boris, Metropolitan Boris, said, "I don't accept the Roman Church anymore. You know, we're going to join the Ukrainian Orthodox. You know, we won't accept the Bishop of Rome anymore. It won't be under his thumb." Okay, fine. You can make that decision, Metropolitan Boris. Now I have to find another Ukrainian Catholic church where the bishop is in communion with Leo of Rome. Okay, that's how it works. I mean, can it be kind of sloppy? Yes, as the history of the church shows, because it's not, the Catholic Church is, well, it's not as monolithic an organization as people think. At least it's not supposed to be. Where nowadays everything gets, like a lot of stuff gets referred to Rome, and Rome makes all these decisions. There are all these offices in Vatican City that make all these decisions for all the bishops throughout the world, and even decides from the names of who will be bishop of which diocese. It wasn't how it was in the early church. It was a lot looser, very much looser. The Bishop of Rome, his immediate concern was for the flock, the people of Christ in Rome. So how does he get so popular? Why do we have 266 popes of Rome? Actually, I think 267 now with Leo. That's Benedict. Oh, yes. And then we had this guy. You might remember him. And Benedict. And now we have this dude, one of us. See how that goes. American in the Vatican. I don't know. You see. Anyways, but what does that mean? How does this happen? Well, it has to do with the idea of Simon Peter, okay, who is the leader, or seems to have been the leader of the 12 apostles. Leader in what way? Well, not leading in the sense that he seemed to be making decisions for them, although you could infer from that he could have, but more his faith. He is the only one. If you read the Gospel of Mark and the other Gospels, there's this remembrance that out of all the 12, only Peter, Simon, had the guts or the faith to say that Jesus was the Messiah. He really believed Jesus was the Messiah. Okay? Maybe we just look at that for a moment. All right, look at that for a moment, because it's instructive. Matthew chapter 16. If you read the Gospel of Matthew, then you know this already. You've read this already. But Matthew, really likes Peter. He highlights Peter's role amongst the apostles more than the other Gospels. He makes it very clear that Peter was in a leadership position, in case you missed it in Mark's Gospel. For example, when Matthew gives the names of the 12 apostles, hold on a second here, that he gets from Mark, he changes it a little bit. Here we go. In Matthew chapter 10, you don't have to read this. You can if you want to, but I'm just going to read this to you. He's basically telling the same story as Mark. Jesus summons out of his doesn't even summon his followers. He summoned his 12 disciples. Remember, for Matthew, the apostles are all the followers of Jesus. They represent everybody. So Jesus doesn't even summon, like in Mark's Gospel, he doesn't summon his followers and then out of them take 12. He summoned his 12 disciples and makes them the apostles. He gave them authority over demons and to cure diseases, etc., and so forth. The names of the 12 apostles, and that's interesting because he switches. He gives you the later designation, the 12 apostles, are these. First, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew, James, the son of Zebedee, and his brother John, etc., etc., etc. He adds that word to Peter. And Mark is just, like Simon, whom Jesus named Peter in Mark. just says his name's Simon, but Jesus gave him the nickname Peter, the Rock. No, nothing about that, nothing else. But Matthew adds this word, the first. The first Simon called Peter. And then, if you notice, he rearranges the order of the apostles' names. And Mark, Andrew comes later, I believe. It's James and John who come after Peter in Mark's gospel. But Andrew is Peter's brother, so notice that he comes second, right after Peter. So he names Peter's brother after him. Then he names James and John and the other apostles. All right. Chapter 16. All right, would anyone like to read chapter 16 of Matthew's Gospel, beginning with verse 13? With verse 13? Ms. O'Brien? Okay. Chapter 16 of the Gospel of Matthew, beginning with verse 13. I'll let you know. Good.
Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah. This was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. Hades cannot hold. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth be bound in heaven, and whatever you on earth is in heaven." And he ordered his disciples not to tell anyone that he was Messiah.
Okay, that's fine. Of course. Don't tell anyone. Wink, wink. Don't tell anyone. Right? Shh. The Irish, as I say, the Irish whisper. Yeah, don't tell anyone I'm the Messiah. Anyway, all right, Jesus. Caesarea, okay, only Mark tells the same story in shorter form, but only Matthew tells us where it happened. Although maybe, no, I think Mark also does tell us. It's in Caesarea Philippi. Let me see here. If I remember, might be misremembering. Let's see here. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, he does. The village is Caesarea Philippi, which was way in the north, of the region, way out of Galilee. Might have been in the province of Syria. I have to look at a map, but it was way north of where Jesus lived. Why he took them up there, we don't know. But if you ever go there, I've never gone there, but I know people who have gone there, and I guess on trips to the Holy Land and stuff like that. And apparently, there's a huge stone hill or big rock hill there, rather prominent. I think a temple to some pagan god was built on it or whatever. But certainly the name of the city is interesting because it's Caesar Philip, okay? It's dedicated to Caesar, one of the Caesars. I forget whether it's Julius or look in the notes on your Bible and see if they tell you which Caesar it was. Well, Caesar at the time, I would imagine, which I think would be Augustus. Chickens. Yes, that old Chickenus, the Roman emperor. Then, of course, there's the other Roman emperor, Pupienus. Pupienus. What an unfortunate name. Am I making that up? You be the judge, Mr. Hinkle. Anyways, some things you can't make up, Mr. Hinkle. The comedy just writes itself.
I'm trying to figure out if you made it up. I can't tell.
All right. Anyways, so Caesar, I believe it would be a Caesar Augustus. Philippi is not the name of the emperor. It's the name of, I believe, Herod Philip, one of the Herods who built this for the pagan emperor. Interesting. The Jewish
local Jewish ruler, built this. Okay. Well, here comes another Jewish ruler to Caesarea. And so that's the scene in which he asks this question: who do people think I am? The scene of Caesarea Philippi, this city built or renovated or whatever by a Jewish king for a non-Jewish pagan oppressor of the Jews, a worshiper of false gods. Who do you say that I am? Well, they're silent, right? You know, who do you? Simon Peter is the only one that says something. Notice if you read the reading, Ms. O'Brien. Notice that, look at the reading. This is why, Ms. Wanamaker, reading is a skill, okay? Has Jesus changed his name, given him his nickname yet in the story? Jesus, where does Jesus tell him, you are now called Peter? Which verse? Which verse, Ms. Robbins? Which verse does Jesus say, you are not Simon anymore, you are now Peter? Which verse? 18. But wait a second. In verse 16, Matthew says, Simon Peter said in reply. How do you explain that? Is Matthew like Nostradamus? Yes, sir.
He wrote it after it happened.
Yeah. He knows the story. Yeah. Absolutely correct, Mr. Hinkle. 100%. Yeah, he wrote it after. He already knows the story. And you could say this is a slip by Matthew or whatever. I don't know. It's just, but no, he knows he was called Simon Peter. This is why. He's telling you why. Why is he called Simon the Rock? Because Peter was, this nickname of the Rock was a very unusual name. It was not used as a man's name. Maybe there's the exception that proves the rule, but in all the archaeology and the literature that we have from the ancient world, there's no one called Peter. Whether in Latin, Greek, or even Aramaic, there was not a name. Sometimes, mainly because I think the word was feminine in Greek, in Latin, Petra. Those are the feminine gender. So people didn't maybe know how to make it work for a man's name. You do every now and then see the name Petra for a woman, never for a man, apparently. Now, maybe they'll find something, and then I'll just say I'm not wrong, Ms. Lacey. It's just the exception that proves the rule. No, but still, it's very uncommon, very unusual name. Not used as a name typically. But Jesus does it. When he says, you are the Christ, and he kind of explains what he means, the Son of the living God, Jesus blesses him. Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah. All right, so his father's name is Jonah. Okay, well, in the Gospel of John, it's Simon's father's name is called John. So was it Jonah? Is it John? Discuss. I don't know. I didn't know Peter personally, so maybe when I get up to the pearly gates, I can ask him, was your father's name Jonah? Did Matthew miss it? Was it Jonah or was it John? Jonah or Yochanan. They sound kind of the same, right? But you know what? Simon comes out and says, Matthew misremembered. Or maybe Matthew was using symbolism, Jonah the prophet or something. I don't know, guy who was in the belly of a whale. I don't know. But no. My father's name was John. Yeah, it was Simon. John's gospel. Simon's John. Matthew's, forgetful or just had another intention, symbolic intention, metaphorical. Okay. Simon Peter. That's all right. It's better. Let me just have one question for you, Simon. Call the guy. Can you smell this cooking? Where can I find it's fine. I can discuss with my namesake, St. Matthew, over some onion bhajis and, red onion chutney and mango lassi, what was going on in his gospel when he says Simon's, he's the son of Jonah. But, not going to lose any sleep over it. But it is interesting. I find it interesting. A little puzzle to think about, like a Rubik's Cube. Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah. Yes? Because, why is he blessed? Because God's given him a revelation. This was revealed to him to make this act of faith. How do I know this? Because Jesus says, flesh and blood, like the physical hasn't revealed this to you, but God has. God has done this. And so I say to you, now he rewards you. I don't want to close the door because, as you know, it's locking for some. I have to send an email to maintenance again. The door started locking again. He's rewarding him. Interesting if you think about it. If you read the Gospels, there are only like 2 people I can think of that Jesus actually blesses. All the other times he talks about blessing, except for like the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor, blessed. But I'm talking about specifically a person, an actual individual. Okay, Jesus talks about blessed are the peacemakers and blessed are the potato chip eaters and blessed are the cheese makers and blessed are the people who have to go to the bathroom all the time. All the time. Or just maybe have to take a walk. I know I can be too much sometimes. I can be overbearing. I accept that. Peter here, blessed are you, Simon. He doesn't say that to any of the other apostles specifically. Blessed are you, Andrew. Blessed are you, Thaddeus. Blessed are you, Matthew/Levi. This is the only one. And the other person, who do you think the other person is who's blessed? Who's said to be blessed? Get to her later. The other person who's a very important character in the New Testament. She's all over the place. But she's usually forgotten. Usually considered a background character, but she's there if you look for her. Mr. Tedeschi, who do you think I'm referring to? You're not sure. You miss me then. Mary Magdalene. Okay. Mary Magdalene. Why do you say that?
She was kind of there, but wasn't like a character. She was spoken.
Okay. Yeah, no, you're on the right track there. Yes, Mary Magdalene is very important. She pops up a number of times. And she's the first, apparently, to see the risen Christ and bring that message to the apostles. She actually was faithful enough and believing enough to go to the tomb. But she still wasn't expecting a resurrection. She was there to anoint the dead body. Beat up the body and anoint it with slices. She didn't expect it. Expected a corpse. She expected something else. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women. Where does that come from? Where does that come from? Where does that come from? Come on, Catholics. And the East is a little bit different. Rejoice, Mother of God, Virgin Mary, the Lord is with thee. Blessed are you amongst women. Huh? Huh? Yeah, it does. The Gospel of Luke. Huh?
Am I smart too?
I never said you weren't smart. Why would you think that about yourself? No, huh? Anyway. The Hail Mary, which comes from the Gospel of Luke, which the angel Gabriel says in his greeting to Mary. Tells her you are blessed amongst all women. The only other individual that I know of in the Gospels who's specifically blessed. Okay. So what does Jesus well, what first he changes, he shows, he confirms as like an act of confirmation that there's a change in Simon. You're not known now as Simon, you are Rock. Okay? Which they don't translate. You have Peter, okay, Petros. What it was in Aramaic was Kepha. Kepha. So we do actually know, not 100%, but we probably 99%, what name, because Jesus wasn't speaking Greek probably to Peter. And some people kind of quibble about Petros. They say, well, in some Greek dictionaries, Petros can just mean a little pebble or a stone. Doesn't mean a big rock or something. All right, fine. We can quibble about that. Well, Kepha in Aramaic, there's no murkiness, no ambiguity. Kepha simply means a rock in Aramaic. And we know that's probably the word Jesus used because our old buddy John, the artist, who likes to maintain those archaisms, calls Peter that. He tells us, well, he has a different story, actually, of Jesus changing his name, a different context. It's not this, but in the first chapter of John, if you look near the end, around verse 40, and it's Andrew who actually, his brother, that goes to Simon and says, we found somebody, we found the Christ. We think we found the Messiah. And he brings Peter to Jesus. And Jesus looked at Simon and said, you are Simon, the son of John. Simon Bar-John. You will be called Cephas, which is a transliteration of the Aramaic Kepha. And since John is not sure that his readers will understand the Aramaic, he says, which is translated Peter, Petros, or he translated into Greek. Okay. And this is the name that Paul, our buddy Paul, almost always calls Simon. He never calls him Shimon or Simon in his letters. A few times. Mostly he calls him Kepha, Cephas. So Jesus doesn't call him Simon anymore. He's called the Rock. But the Rock of what? Okay. The rock of his faith. He had faith in Jesus. He was open to receiving this revelation to make a statement of faith about Jesus. But what are the consequences of him being kind of like a rock of faith, or having that rock of faith, that certainty in Jesus, that complete trust in Jesus? What's Jesus going to do to him? Well, upon that rock of faith, I'm going to build my kahal, my ecclesia. It's the first time Jesus uses the word in the Gospel of Matthew, or anywhere else. My community will be built on your rock of faith. And faith is held by somebody. So you can't kind of like say, sure, it's the rock of, at least I've heard some Christians say, yeah, it was the rock of faith of Peter, believing in Jesus. That's really what the rock of the church is. Okay, that's fine. But faith is professed by someone. Faith is not some, amorphous like spaghetti monster floating out and flying through the sky. Faith or belief or trust, whatever you want to call it, is a profession. Someone has to profess it. It's not an abstraction. Peter's not an abstraction. Jesus is not saying, okay, Peter, you can go away now, but your faith, stay here. I'll make you the rock of my kahal. No, he says to Peter, who has the faith. And he tells him that the gates of the netherworld, or Hades, I believe is what the Greek actually says, but they assume that readers won't know what Hades is, but Hades was the Greek word for the underworld, the place of the dead. Okay, so neither you'll have control over life, keys over life, and you'll have authority over the dead. Neither those living nor those dead will be able to oppose you or oppose his church, his community. So Jesus is talking about the church. Now he switches specifically to Peter. Okay, so we still have that issue. Yes, you can say in first instance he's referring just to Peter's faith. Okay, fine. But now he's referring to Peter. What does he tell Peter specifically? I give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. And we still speak that way. We have that metaphor in our language. Someone is given the key to the city of Philadelphia if they do something prominent, right? You want to honor them, give them the key to the city. Well, what does the key to the city really do, Mr. I mean, this is like a door, a special door that's going to unlock. Maybe to the treasure. Or is it maybe from like the ancient world where all the cities had walls and they had entrances, and so you needed someone had a key to open those entrances to let people come in and out during the day, especially at night when they're all locked up. So you have that authority of who comes in and who comes out. But it seemed, or did Jesus just like take out a literal key, an actual key, Mr. Jedesky? Say, okay, the charge is yours, Peter. Don't run it into a train. I'm assuming it's a metaphor, that Jesus didn't actually have an ancient form of key that he, gave to Jesus. But even if he did, I think we come to the same kind of conclusion that he's giving power to Peter that he doesn't give necessarily to all the others. The keys of the kingdom of God, which is, right, Jesus' main message, right? Jesus is the bringer of the kingdom of God, the reign of God. He is the agent of the reign of God, right? And it looks like he's transferring that to this man. Just like he does with other things. I raise the dead, now you can raise the dead. I forgive sins, now you can forgive sins. I can heal lepers, now you can heal lepers. I cast out evil spirits, now you can. I am the agent, the bringer of the kingdom of God, the king of the kingdom sitting on his throne. Well, you'll sit on thrones too, won't you? You now have the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Just like I do. Don't screw it up. And whatever you decide on earth shall be decided in heaven. So the decisions apparently that Simon would make, I guess for the Christian community, I'm assuming that's what Jesus is referring to, his kahal, my ecclesia, my church. Whatever decision Simon now Peter makes, God is with that. It's bound in heaven. And whatever you loosen or say, you don't have to do anymore. Maybe like circumcision, circumcising your male children anymore. You don't have to do that anymore. But you do have to do baptism. Okay? Baptism is necessary, circumcision is not. Well, doesn't the law of Moses say, it says nothing about baptism, but it says pretty specifically, you got to circumcise your male children, blah, blah, blah. Excuse me. The church says circumcision is no longer necessary, but baptism is. Yeah, but you guys made up baptism. You took it from Judaism and made it about you. Excuse me. Do you have the keys of the kingdom of heaven? I'm binding and loosing here. And Jesus says, if you do that, I'll back you up. Whatever you loose will be loosed in heaven. All right, so how do we get from Peter to Pope? How do we get from Peter to Pope? Because some people might say, okay, yeah, I can see that Peter had a leadership position, was very well honored in the early church, which he was. I think that's demonstrable historically from Christian writings of the time. Peter was thought very highly of. But, Peter did not found the church in Rome. There were Christians there, for a number of years, maybe decades. And he was not the founder of the Church of Rome. He was not the first bishop or overseer of the Church of Rome, although traditionally he's said to be. But, that's just, traditional language and stuff. It's custom, because he's such a great figure. But we know historically he was not there when the first, the gospel was preached in Rome, and he didn't found the church. What's the connection? The connection, because he had been in other places as well. He had been up in Jerusalem. He was in Antioch for a while. But then somehow he made his way to Rome, which is where he died. He was executed for his faith for being a Christian. And that's the thing. When he was in the community of the church, that was, he wasn't the first bishop of Rome. He was an apostle. Was an apostle. So it wasn't technically a bishop at all, right? Because bishops are successors of the apostles. You know, how can he be a successor to the apostles when he's an apostle? You know, like, logically, that doesn't make any sense. He was in a distinct category, but it's where he shed his blood for Christ. Not where he was before all that time, where he made the ultimate testimony or witness. And that was in Rome. It just happened to be in Rome. Could have been anywhere else. And so what we believe is that by his being in that community, being part of it, somehow leading it as the apostle, because of his stature, his status, but also his status amongst the apostles, and the fact that he was willing to somehow his spiritual authority, because of his martyrdom, his witness to faith, passed on to the bishops of Rome, so that they kind of took that on. This is our job now, like Peter, to maintain the faith about Jesus, make sure there's no deviations, to constantly proclaim that he has risen from the dead, that he is the Messiah of God. Okay? Just as Peter believed. Just as Christ was. Do the popes always do this? Well, no. If you read the history of the popes, you know, this guy, he seems like a good guy. I'm not a big baseball fan. But if I were, you know, I do like the White Sox more than the Cubs. If I were, you know. It's okay if you like the sport. Great. You know, I like playing it. I liked playing it. But it's one of those sports I like playing more than I really like sitting and watching for a few hours on end. Although I know they've tried to shorten the games. But, you know, he's not Jesus. Simon Peter was not Jesus. Just to close it. Jesus is Jesus. You cannot confuse, and the church does not confuse. If you know the church teaching about the papacy and the role that the popes have, they are the servants of Christ. They are representatives of Christ. Actually, the older title is Vicarius Sancti Petri, representative of St. Peter. They should go back to that. They are not Christ, you know, and then the Pope is not like Jesus. He's not speaking oracles like every interview or talk or document that the Pope issues is somehow a revelation from God. It's not. And the church doesn't say it is. Never has. But you can find people who treat it like that. I treat it like that sometimes. I have to recover myself. It's not sacred, you know, an encyclical from the Pope is not a sacred writing. I certainly have to respect it because of who it is and what his role, what Christ intended Peter's role to be, and the successors of Peter, who are the bishops of Rome, could only die in one place. It just happened to be Rome. Could have been Alexandria, could have been Antioch, whatever. Could have been Jerusalem, but he didn't. That's just historic. I hope and pray this is a good man. He's a good and holy man. Not all the popes have been like that. There have been some really, really bad popes. Really bad. Barely Christian. And there have been some really holy popes. Okay. But I think if you read the history of the 260-some popes, most of them were just middle of the road. They were just average, you know, if they lived very long. Some of them died really quickly. But if they were able to live and do something, you know, a lot of them, they were just average guys. They weren't necessarily saints, but they weren't, you know, workers of evil otherwise. You know, you have to watch out when you really do get a bad pope, if God forbid. You know, he's like living with his mistresses or, you know, killing his enemies and stuff like that, declaring war on the city of Florence, riding into battle on a horse with his sword, killing other Christians. Anyways, Jesus is always in charge, and believe me, Jesus will if you also read the history of the church, and I believe this, he lets us know that he's in charge when he needs to. Okay. Enough about talking about this man. Let's talk about God. A little segue from the Pope to God, you know, even though the Pope is not God, obviously. What is God? Well, let's talk about God in general. What is a God in general? In the general sense, it's any powerful, superhuman entity. I probably should take superhuman out of that, just a powerful entity. Because you can have even human-like gods or humans that become godlike. You know, Hercules, people who are divinized. The Caesars, the Roman emperors, were declared to be gods by the Senate after their death, even though they were human beings. So, okay, but is a powerful, someone who's become more, it's more than, usually more than human and very powerful being. In general, okay? We're using language here. We're using human language, which is necessarily limited. I think it's obvious. Our language about most things that we know in this world is limited. It's inadequate. Okay, so these are just words that are applied, but I mean, they have meaning. And, you know, it's not like these words were revealed by God or revealed by something. They're just the words that are used. Okay? They're human words. These are words that people trying to figure out what this is. Yes? And if you find out as you're going along that the words you're using are not clear enough or maybe are distortive of what you really believe and think, then you have to modify the words. So and that happens in Christianity as well. You know, there's some words used in the past or ways of describing God that were not, that worked for some Christians in understanding. But as time developed, they were easily misunderstood as well, misinterpreted. And the church said, put this aside for now. You know, we just won't use the language anymore because it's too easy to misunderstand. Although some of the language still persists in church worship. So, I mean, using human language like this word God, which is, you know, probably comes from the Proto-Indo-European word wuton, something called upon or prayed to or invoked, tom, all right, from our, you know, Indo-European language family. I think I mentioned before, maybe not, but, you know, there are various families of Latin-related languages across the globe. You know, one of the largest is a language family that stretches from Western Europe to Northern India, which are related languages. And we get our word God probably from this word that they used long time ago, something you pray to, you call upon. So, I mean, our language and our concepts are only the only reliable tools that we have for knowing about something. The physical world just as much as, say, the spiritual world. Okay? It's our tools. It's all we've got. It's all we have. All right. So sometimes to me, it's not so much that things are absolutely clear or crystal clear, but sometimes I think as long as we're getting it right enough at the time that we live in, I think it seems that God's okay with that. God can work with that, I think, from my experience, at least as a teacher. If God is a good teacher, you know, he works with what he can at the time. And if later on he finds that a person is open to knowing some more, understanding more, then he might give you some more. Okay? So it's right enough. It doesn't mean we know everything or everything accurately about something. And other times it might be more important, not positively that we know just enough to be right. Sometimes it might be more important that we don't get it wrong. Negative protection, you know? Make sure that we don't get it wrong about what God is or his will or what the world is like. Okay? So God in the Christian sense is not a powerful entity, although God is powerful to a preeminent degree. Yes, he holds all power, the source of all power. He's not human, so he's superhuman. And he's not an entity. He is being itself. He's not a being. He is being. but he is those things in a certain way. But for the Christian perspective, it means for what is completely and ultimately the perfect personal being, or in perfect existence itself. Existence existing perfectly of itself, with no source of its existence. It exists perfectly of itself. And since it exists of itself, it's ultimate. There's nothing before it to give it existence, and there's nothing after. There's nothing it needs to get existence from. It's simply, you could say, just being itself, existence itself, reality itself, you could say. All right, so what can we... All right, well, I guess I'll stop here and come back to God next week. God bless you all. Good weekend. I'll figure out what I'm going to cut all this. Well, whatever. Good day, miss. Have a good day, Miss Hoy. Huh? Thank you, miss. Have a good day, miss.
These are the ones we tied